You know, for as long as we've been human, we've been staring up at the stars wondering, what is all this? And at the same time, looking inward and asking, what is this me that's doing the wondering? They seem like two totally separate questions, right? Well, today, we're going to explore a really fascinating and kind of mind-bending bridge that might just connect the two. And it all starts with this legendary quote from Albert Einstein. Now, when he said spooky action at a distance, he was not impressed. He was actually trying to point out a flaw in quantum mechanics, something so strange and illogical that he thought, no way, this can't be right. The theory must be missing something. And that spooky action is where our two great enigmas meet. On one hand, you have the outer world of physics and this now proven reality of quantum entanglement, this bizarre, instantaneous connection between particles no matter how far apart they are. And on the other hand, you have our inner world, consciousness itself, the raw experience of being alive, which science honestly can't really explain. So here's the big question we're tackling. Could these two massive mysteries actually be two sides of the same coin? All right, let's dive into that. First, we've got to get a handle on what this spooky connection really is, because the story of how it went from something Einstein mocked to Nobel Prize winning science is pretty incredible. So it all kicked off back in 1935 with something called the EPR paradox. Einstein and a couple of his colleagues came up with a thought experiment. They said, look, imagine you have two particles that are linked in some way, like a pair of gloves. You put them in separate boxes and send one to the other side of the universe. The moment you open your box and see a left-handed glove, you instantly know the other one is a right-handed glove. But quantum mechanics was saying something even weirder, that the glove didn't become left-handed until you looked at it, and at that exact instant, the other one became right-handed. To Einstein, that communication, faster than light, was just impossible. But here's the amazing part. What started as an argument against the theory actually paved the way to proving it. Decades later, in 1964, a physicist named John Bell figured out a mathematical way to actually test it. And then, in the 80s, Alain Aspect ran the experiments. And guess what? The results showed that the spooky connection was real. Einstein was wrong. And this work was so fundamental, so important to our understanding of reality, that it finally won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2022. It's official. Our universe is just that spooky. Okay, so entanglement is a solid fact of the universe. Now, this is where things get really wild, because it turns out that this cutting-edge 21st century physics has this uncanny echo of ideas that are thousands of years old. The key concept here is something called non-locality. It basically means that entangled particles aren't two separate things sending signals to each other. They act as a single, unified system, even if they're billions of miles apart. In a very real sense, the concept of separate places just doesn't apply to them. They are fundamentally connected. And what's so fascinating is that for millennia, mystics and philosophers have been saying something very, very similar. Not through math and experiments, but through deep contemplation. In Hinduism, you have the idea of tat tvam asi, you are that. The individual self, Atman, is identical to the universal reality, Brahman. In Buddhism, the concept of dependent origination says that nothing exists independently. Everything arises in connection with everything else. You see it again and again. So, what do we do with this? Is this just a big coincidence? Are we just using entanglement as a cool new metaphor for ancient spiritual ideas? Or, and this is the big one, could it be a convergence? A moment where two of humanity's greatest quests for truth, the scientific and the spiritual, are actually starting to point to the same deeply interconnected reality. Okay, holding that thought, let's pivot to our other great mystery, consciousness itself. Because some really bold thinkers are starting to wonder if the quantum world isn't just a metaphor for consciousness, but might actually be its source. The reason scientists are even willing to go down this rabbit hole is because of what's known as the hard problem of consciousness. Look, we can map out all the neurons, the electrical signals, the chemistry in the brain, the physical stuff. But we have absolutely no idea how all that wetware produces the private, inner, subjective feeling of being you, the experience of seeing the color red or feeling happy. This gap has opened the door for some wild, speculative theories. You've got ideas like the OR theory, which proposes there are quantum processes happening deep inside our neurons. There's even an interpretation that suggests it's the very act of a conscious observer, you, that makes the fuzzy quantum world snap into a definite reality. Now, I have to be clear, these are not mainstream ideas, but they show a genuine search for a deeper explanation of the mind, one that might have to go quantum.
So let's just run with this for a minute. Let's imagine these ideas are pointing in the right direction. What would it actually mean for us, for you and me, if reality is fundamentally interconnected at the quantum level, and our very consciousness is part of that fabric? The implications are huge.
Well, it immediately begs the question, if tiny little particles can be inseparably linked across any distance, then why not minds? It's a massive speculative leap for sure, but it follows the same non-local logic. And if our minds could be connected in some way, maybe that means our individual consciousness isn't the whole story. Maybe each of us is less like a separate island of awareness and more like a unique wave on a single, vast ocean of universal consciousness. And if that's true, it totally shatters our everyday idea of being a self. The feeling of being a separate, isolated person locked inside a skull starts to look less like a fact and more like a perception. A useful illusion, maybe, but an illusion nonetheless. And this is where it all leads. Because if we truly are all interconnected, if we're all just expressions of one underlying reality, then compassion stops being just a nice, virtuous idea. It becomes the most logical, rational response to the way things actually are. Harming someone else, in a very real sense, becomes a form of self-harm. Okay, I know this is all very grand, very cosmic and abstract. So, how can we possibly take these huge ideas and actually feel them or live them in our everyday lives? How do we turn the theory into an experience? Well, the source material points to a few timeless practices. Mindfulness is really about paying attention to the constant, interconnected flow of your own experience, seeing that thoughts and sensations just arise and pass away. You can also do simple reflections, like thinking about all the people, plants, and sunlight that went into the food you're eating. Suddenly, you're connected to a global web. And then there are compassion practices, which are specifically designed to help you actively dissolve that feeling of being a separate self. And so that brings us to the final thought, which is really a question for you. This isn't just a cool science fact or a philosophical game. If you take seriously the idea that you are an inseparable, entangled part of this entire universe, what changes? How will you live your life differently tomorrow?